Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering Speaking Bones, chapters 20 and 21, opening salvos, and an unexpected mirror. In these chapters, we have got a new character added to the mix, everybody. Another humble servant who is unexpectedly thrown into the same bed as a royal. And also a battle, which I really didn't see coming this quick. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everyone. I am Natasha. Thank you very much to Kyle for commissioning this episode. What's up, Kyle? He's here in the chat. This section was a really fascinating one. It's what I find compelling here. It's not just what's going on in each individual chapter, but how complete the juxtaposition is of what's going on and the nature of the interactions. Like, we've got this outright battle with these horrible slurs and these brutal people with their ethnic cleansing and torture. And then we have, like, what if somebody just got you, though? You know, on like an emotional and an intellectual level. What if you just met somebody who, like, understood you? And they just couldn't be more opposite. But I'm so glad that I got the 21 like refresher after 20. So we start off chapter 20 from Gostan Ryoto's POV. And I knew that the last chapter had ended with Gia being like, all right, go get me Firo. Let's talk about war. I didn't think we were going to just have war. I thought, we're going to summon Firo, we're going to talk about war, and I'm going to talk his ass to death. And then eventually we'll get around to maybe having a battle. Did not see us jumping into it right away. So a part of me was a little bit like, I won't say that I thought this was a bad idea. I definitely think we should be going to war. Like, I feel like this is the right thing to do at this point. But I also wished that I could have seen the organization once he got the okay. You know what I'm saying? I wanted to see him like savoring that victory a little bit. I wanted to see what went into planning the assault. I was a little bit bummed that we jumped right over all of that. At the same time, though, I'm kind of glad we jumped over it, because sometimes that shit can be real tedious. You know what I'm saying? So I don't know. I have very like mixed feelings about it. But anyway, this fucking Note of Me, kids. Note of Me. There are some characters that I'm like, I need all of the worst things to happen to this person. Their simple death wouldn't be enough. They have made so many people suffer in such a way. Their death has to at least approach a fraction of what they have inflicted on the world. And you would really think that Note of Me would like kind of fall into that category. But the thing is that he is such a coward and so completely obsessed with his own survival that I don't even want to inflict that on him, because I know the simple fact of being killed at all will come as such a shock to him, because he's done everything he can to ensure he's in a position of strength via weakness, that he's one of the few that I truly think I hate him so much, and yet a simple death for him would be fine. That would be completely, because it's just the fact of not making it, that would be enough, you know? Like somebody like, for me, Joffrey Lannister, for example, he's such a little shit. And when he gets poisoned, his death is just, it's too fast. It's way too fast. And it's not humiliating enough. It was not satisfying for me. But note of me, because he's so puny and sad, I can't muster the same kind of like aggressive feelings towards him. I just feel disgust and contempt. And there's just a sort of, I just want somebody to put him out of his misery, honestly. Because that's where all of this is coming from, is misery. But there is also that gleefulness. And it's just, ugh. And what I really appreciate is like getting to be in Ghost Town Ryoto's point of view here and seeing her reaction to him, because what he's doing in this entire section is he is, as she puts it, trying to like out Lyucu the Lyucu. He is using slurs against the Dara. He is, at one point he talks about how he helped to brainstorm torture methods for slow deaths for the prisoners that they're keeping, because all of the Dara slaves that are fighting for the Lyucu, they're fighting under threat of their, you know, children and parents and family members being threatened with death and torture. So he's like talking about how creative some of the ideas were and how he came up with some himself, and his like, it's like his mouth is watering when he's talking about, like he's genuinely excited by it. And that's the only part where I start to be like, maybe a slow death is necessary, because, you know, it's one thing to be like, I'm a complete traitor piece of shit in order to keep my worthless skin alive, which, while still despicable, I can have some empathy for just being willing to do whatever it takes. I don't think that's a good way to be, and I don't approve of it, but I can understand that position. I don't, though, if he turns out to be like, I'm enjoying this, which it feels like maybe, it's hard for me to tell how much of that is genuinely him enjoying it and how much of it is him putting on a show of enjoyment because he thinks that's what she wants to see. But if there is enjoyment, if he really is somebody who likes to hurt people, then fuck that guy. So Ghost Hun is listening to him. Oh my God. She just describes him as nauseating. One wonders what kind of rotten dream herbs that usurper, Gia the whore, had smoked that made her dare to challenge the perspicacious, the merciful, the fair Tanvanaki. She's throwing away the lives of all the poor sailors on those ships with this mad venture. I'm ashamed to think that I once called her my empress. Oh, if only the Dara Ra'aki had been wise enough to accept the compassionate terms of our omnipotent Peku. I weep with sorrow, thinking of the blood about to flow, but then I tremble with admiration as I imagine the pity that would have been on Peku Votan Tenryo's face. Oh my God. This man is so tiresome, I swear. So, I'm sorry, guys. I just keep, like, it keeps going. Even when she tells him to shut the fuck up, he can't, you know? It takes, like, multiple shut the fuck ups for him to shut the fuck up. To counter the Dara Armada, Ghost Town had under her command 5 city ships escorted by 10 smaller warships that formed a defensive line ahead of them. The formation was designed to prevent mechanical Krubans from sneaking up on the city ships, which carried the primary weapons of the Lyucu, Garinafins. A second line of Lyucu defenders floated in the air above the calm water between the fleets. These silk and bamboo airships, propelled by feathered oars, had been seized from the natives during the Lyucu conquest. Instead of the banner of the House of Dandelion, a blue breaching Kruben on a red field, they flew the ensign of Ukyutaasa, a string of wolf tails flapping in the wind. Gostan was grateful that Tambanaki, despite fierce objections from Kutanrovo, had authorized her use of these airships to augment the Lyucu fleet. And then we get a flashback. So, Kutanrovo is really starting to go off the deep end. And that is not to say she wasn't a fucking lunatic psychopath already. But it's feeling like the drugs that she is taking without quite realizing it are beginning to eat away at her logic and sense of self-preservation. She's here, first of all, doing what she has been doing, which is throwing her opinions in Tanvanaki's face in front of everybody with a kind of like abandon that is so certain. She is so certain of her position and that she is currently untouchable that she can really get away with more than she should be able to get away with. And Tanvanaki winds up having to put her foot down here, but I am not sure that's really going to do the job. I think temporarily it cowed this woman and reminded her who the fuck she's dealing with, but only in such a way that I believe will cause Kutanrovo to like regroup and figure out a way to make it so that this doesn't ever happen again later on. So she's calling the airships feeble, to which, of course, Gostan is like, they're not feeble, and we already use them for patrols and stuff. What are you even talking about? Why wouldn't we add them to the fleet? And Kutanrovo calls Gostan blind. You're tainted with their muddy patterns of thinking. Kutanrovo had become even more dedicated to the project of eradicating native influence. She dispensed Tolyusa at every ritual and gathering. Gostan wondered where Kutanrovo was finding so much wild Tolyusa, but so long as Kutanrovo didn't endanger the military supply, she couldn't really accuse her of impropriety. Lately, Kutanrovo's anti-native diatribes had grown so extreme that sometimes Kutanrovo sounded to Gostan like a parody of herself. At first, Gostan had been hopeful that Ukyutaasa's increasingly untenable strategic position would finally force Tanvanaki to turn away from the hardliner party. But Tanvanaki continued to accede, and when Gostan confronts her, she's basically like, the fucking box has been opened. You know, I just gotta ride it out. That's all we can do. And Tanvanaki is like clearly kind of trapped here. She had no choice but to go along with Kutanrovo's explanations. The reinforcements had been withdrawn because the gods were testing Ukyutaasa. During the intervening years, Kutanrovo had unleashed a self-reinforcing mass movement among the Lyucu, and the madness was no longer confined to a few thanes or even one party. The killing of natives who showed the least sign of defiance had become so routine that the court re-rememberers had ceased to keep track. Lyucu and Togatan youths as young as 10 participated in competitions to hunt native villagers for sport. Step by step, Kutanrovo's vision of Lyucu supremacy, founded upon the complete subjugation and eventual elimination of the native population, had become an article of faith among the Naros and Kuleks, as revered as the tales of the adventures of Kiki Savo and Afir. Which, that really sucks. Like, the thing that sucks so bad is that if it gets to that level, getting her out of the picture isn't going to fix anything. Kutanrovo is the current figurehead, but she has created something here that if she gets taken out, another person who knows how to spin things will be able to step in and take over and will be in the exact same place with the same problems. So that's my real regret here is like, up to now, I have been sort of like, just kill Kuton Rovo and we'll be done with this. And that's not really true anymore. It's gotten past the point where that would work. And, we find out that they're just like, even though everything about what's going on is making life worse for the Lyucu, they're still like backing her. Ghost Town is like, the Lyucu economy is weakening. The only reason that we're getting through is because of the tribute from Dara. Kuleks and low-ranking Naros had lost what little wealth they had as everything became more scarce and expensive. As their lives worsened, they clung even harder to the ideal of Lyuku supremacy. Kuton Rovo knew how to take advantage of their state of desperation. She distributed to the Kuleks and low-ranking Naros more Toliusa and Kyofir than they had ever gotten from Tombanaki. She was celebrated as the great Kyofir giver, the reviver of the Lyuku spirit, the best and most loyal Thane of them all. And what I'm curious about here, because, we had this whole plan that Gia was working on to... I am assuming that the plan was, I will make these incredibly dangerous, addictive Toliusa berries. I will put them out for the Lyuku to get completely addicted to, and then I will cut off the supply, and they will basically shred themselves to death during their withdrawal throes. That's what I have been assuming the plan was. But in the last chapter, when Gia is being told, like, we really need to go to war, your people want it, and you have got to listen to them, that's been your whole, assertion that that's what you're building towards, and here you're being given a clear message. And she's thinking to herself that she was so close to achieving her goal with the berries. I'm really wondering how much longer she thinks it's going to take, because I don't have a clear picture when she did this experiment with the prisoners and stuff that she has done. I don't have a good picture of how long it took before she got them to the point that they really began losing it. And I don't remember how long, I don't have a good sense of how long it has been since... Because, we have the beginning of each chapter is like the 8th year since the, coming of the fleet from... And that's honestly, guys, not super helpful for me. I don't internalize those dates and numbers at the beginning of each chapter unless it's a real question that I go back and triple check. It doesn't sink in. So I am not totally sure how long this has been going on. If anybody is hooked already, I have to assume Kuton Rovo and her closest people are definitely hooked to the point where it's going to be really bad if they don't get their shit. The lower levels, I would guess, only started getting it after her closest confidants and stuff. So I'm just wondering, Gia's thinking about how close she was to being able to realize her plan. And I'm kind of like, is the plan not going to work even at this point that you've reached now? It might still be able to go off. I don't know. Kyle is in the chat. He says, Ken Liu's villain writing has just reached its peak by this book. Yeah. Ms. T says, I don't know if she has a good view of how much the zealots are being given. That's a good point, Ms. T. She may be sort of imagining how much they're using and isn't getting that it's basically as good as money at this point. But so maybe she didn't need that extra time. Maybe that's been... I am just really, really because you guys know this whole thing has been hanging over it all. The drugs that I've been waiting for that shoe to drop. Now they're here. It took me a little bit to quite realize what the drugs were in. And then we're in the midst of one of the most severe downturns. And what Gia's plan was, I think, was to stop the flow and let them just destroy themselves while otherwise in a seemingly peaceful situation. But now we're going to get a real weird kind of combo of them having this drug and also being in the midst of battles and things. And I don't know how that's going to play out. So let's see. Tamanaki tried to secure a future for Uki to Asa by demanding even more tribute, but the bluff had failed in spectacular fashion. Somehow, the young emperor had succeeded in a power struggle against the empress, and instead of a tributary fleet, Dara had sent an invasion force. Let me explain why these useless native gas bags must not be added to our glorious fleet. Using airships to patrol for escaping slaves is like fashioning Garinifin muzzles out of Garinifin leather. There's nothing wrong with employing the tools of the slaves to control slaves, but war is the most sacred act of the Lyucu people, a manifestation of the Lyucu spirit. Using slave weapons in war will pollute the Lyucu spirit with the contagion of defeat. Which is just such horseshit. It's just super not true, and it's the sort of thing that I know this isn't actually possible, but a part of me just wants there to be a parallel dimension where Tamanaki can sit back and let Kutan Rovo get her way and watch as they fail spectacularly. I don't even think that would do any good if I'm honest, because Kutan Rovo is such a fucking pro when it comes to spin that she would really probably be able to like use the fact that they were beaten as evidence towards some other fucking declaration that she's made. But nevertheless, one can dream. And you know, Ghost Hunt is like about to lose her shit. And Tamanaki steps in. Airships can do things Garinifins cannot. And Kutan Rovo is like, well, the Peki Votan didn't conquer with airships. And Tamanaki's like, yeah, my father didn't do a lot of things that I'm doing, just like he did a lot of things that his father didn't do. Things change. And Kutan Rovo says, you are not the Peki Votan. A great Lyucu, like the Peki Votan, is born once in 100 generations. He rode the will of the gods with as much skill as you. Like the heroes Kikisavo and Afir, he could show the Lyucu a new way of life. But you, forgive me, Votan, you do not wield Langioboto. That was a mistake. So Tamanaki just goes for it. She knelt with one knee on the back of the prone figure, I've sounded British, prone figure of Kutan Rovo, her war club held aloft above the Thane's head. You forget yourself. I've been patient with you because I don't wish to see Votan Sadan Ta'asa and Votan Ru Ta'asa at one another's throats. Perhaps, like so many of your frenzied followers, you've been ingesting too many Toliusa berries to think straight. Yes, she has. That's what she's been doing. But let me clear away the haze in your mind. Where I point, you go. Kutan Rovo remained submissively immobile. The other hardliner thanes stood rooted to their spots, none daring to move. Tamanaki got up and stepped back onto the throne. Incorporate all combat-worthy airships into the fleet. As you command, Votan, said Ghost Hunt. Oh, boy. So Tamanaki says to Kutan Rovo, you're going to get us the slave labor ready and prepare our defenses on land. Put your vision into practice. And Ghost Hunt is just like, man, I understand Tamanaki doing this like crush right here, but she is still giving Kutanrovo like an important job. She's still trying to appease her ego, you know, even after slapping her and telling her to mind her place. She gives her a little treat after. And this is just not going to fucking be sustainable. So then we go back to the actual battle. And Ghostan is looking at the ships that are coming at them. And she's like, these just aren't really, like, up to the challenge here. Why are they initiating this if they're not going to be able to win? And she asks Notami who's commanding the enemy fleet. And he says, Puma Yemu. He is a coward, unwilling and unable to engage a superior force in open combat. I despise the man with all my heart. Ghostan ordered the smaller, nimbler ships in the protective line to tack into the wind and meet the oncoming Dara armada. Lyucu Naros shouted orders and native slave sailors scrambled to obey. She watched the maneuvers of the fleet with trepidation. She was confident of her own and Tamanaki's preparations, but the weak link had always been their small numbers. Notami spoke up. You may have complete confidence in the native crew. Each slave serving has a family that have been chained at the bottom of a pit. Unless we achieve victory today, Thane Kutanrovo will execute them. And Ghostan, once again, is just like, ugh, I hate this. This is exactly the way they trained the Garinafins, and she wasn't super comfortable with that either. And now those practices have just been put in place against the Dara, you know, like, it's just, she just doesn't have the stomach for this kind of treatment. And that's the only reason that I, like, can really respect her, is that she sees this all as the monstrous, gross shit it is. And let's see. The two fleets were so far apart they would not come within range of each other's catapults for some time. Abruptly, massive stones shot off the decks of the Dara armada. They were way faster than they should be, and they splash near the ships, but they don't really strike home. And the Lyucu are like, how did they get that powerful? What the hell? What's going on? And Pumayemu is like, oh, nice, because these catapults have got like a counterweight on them that helps them just shoot a lot further. But when we go back into Ghostan Ryoto's POV, she's like, these are kind of a spectacular show, but they don't have a huge amount of practical value, actually. Notami says, shame, shame! Even that coward Kunigaru never deployed such decadent and unnatural weapons. Oh my god. So what he's doing here is basically being like, I swear they didn't used to have weapons like this when I was there. I would have told you. And I really appreciate that being mentioned, that Ghostan can see through what he is like couching in praise and praise for the Lyucu and condemnation of the Dara people. It's, again, all about him saving his own skin, you know? So the Dara ships like zigzag away, and Ghostan tells them to stop pursuit because she is used to Pumayemu and the fact that he like will duck into places and then either lure them to, you know, a spot that they don't want to be, or it will be a feint and the attack will come from somewhere else. And she tells them to hold back, and a lot of the others are like not happy with this. They don't like this approach. But let's see. I'm sorry, I'm trying to like, I have to speed it up because the next chapter is even longer. Let's see. They're expecting me to run, which is why we must stay and give them a fight we won't forget. Stay here and protect Monitor Aten. Help me gnaw this thing down. After the about half the crew and sailors were drawn from the regular navy, while the rest were soldiers in Firo's private army. They made short work of the masts. Pumayemu had the same order transmitted to other ships in the fleet. So Ghostan is watching this, and she is just like, what is this? He looks like he's like sacrificing himself, but that just doesn't seem like his style. What is this? And then we get the battle kites. Only now did Puma's earlier order to dismast his own ships make sense. With the decks cleared of all interfering superstructures, crews could guide the kites in virtually any direction without fear of entangling the control lines. And the battle kites, it turns out, are loaded with bombs. And this is really, oh God. Puma's sailors sang and labored at their winch, bringing the giant battle kite around. As it swept past the gondola of the airship, the bombing crew craned their necks to get a better look at the kite. The time seemed to slow down for the bombing crew as the kite loomed into view. And they look at Pumayemu, and a bolt thwacks down. The firebomb fell from his grasp and rolled along the floor, its fuse lit. "Smother it!" He jumped at the firebomb. The faces of his mother, his father, his wife, his 2 children flashed through his mind in an instant. "I'm sorry," he muttered. The bomb exploded. Oh, I hated that, you guys. Just knowing like his family is on the line like that. And I have no doubt they're going to uphold their side of things and execute those people. How are they going to get anybody to keep fighting if they don't follow through on the torture and murder? It's just not like, you know. However, that is also a completely unsustainable practice, which of course Kutan Robo does not care about sustainability. Like, that is not her jam at all. So let's see. Even after Gia had been forced to resume a state of war against the Lyucu, she refused to commit to Firo the level of resources he needed for an all-out invasion. And Firo is like, yeah, all right, I get that. So we need to figure out a way to achieve victory with very few resources and get this done soon, because the people could change their mind at literally any moment. He was gambling on the fact that the Lyucu, being devotees of Garinafin warfare, would not bother to learn how to fight effectively with airships. Events proved him correct. Ghost Hunt deployed her airships as scouts and equipped them only with bombs, instead of staffing them with full complements of archers. Since archery required long training and crossbows demanded skilled mechanics, the Lyucu never adopted these weapons for themselves. As a result, Ghost Hunt's airships were ill-equipped to deal with the battle kites. And, of course, the most effective countermeasure was to close off the bombing bay doors, preventing crossbows from targeting the interior. In response, the kite riders directed their bolts at the airship hulls, and the powerful missiles were able to penetrate the light armor to puncture the gas bags inside. And Pumayemu watched the receding airships with satisfaction. He signaled for the battle kites to be retracted, landing nimbly on the deck himself. So, you know, all of this is just going to feed into what Kutan Robo said. The fact that, like, they didn't use the battle kites, or not battle kites, the airships properly. She's going to try and act like that is a failure of the airship instead of a failure of their learning to use the airship. And the airship captains observed the commotion far below with puzzlement. Long oars were brought up from the holds. What in the world are they building? Is that a giant battle kite? Once more, the smaller battle kites were launched into the air. Ghost Hunt realized something was wrong. Quick, full speed ahead, give general chase. But it was too late. As the smaller battle kites lifted into the air, they pulled the big kite sails up with them. And the billowing, free-floating sails filled while the mastless Dara ships began to move. And she says, I doubt they can sustain this high speed for this long. We'll pursue the enemy by sea. She was relieved by the outcome of the battle. Though she had suffered some casualties, she'd also gotten a good look at the capabilities of the Dara invasion force. The new weapons were clever, but hardly the kind of terrifying engines of death like the Silkmotic airships at Zathan Gulf. And that is pretty much the end of the chapter. And it's interesting how at one point she thinks about how there's always a tendency to try and fight the last battle, which is like a saying. And I appreciated that being mentioned because I was kind of falling into that trap in my head as well. But anyway, okay. I got to really get into chapter 21 here because this chapter in the audiobook was almost 2 hours by itself. This chapter is all about a whole new character who at this point is living in Ginpen, but had been living in Dimushi. Zen-Kara is a really intelligent, she's, gives a Zomi kind of energy. Somebody who is extremely motivated and intelligent and really curious and constantly like attempting to better herself. But she is from a country that is seen as kind of backward. And it isn't, because like that's not really a thing, let's be honest. But she is seen here as a foreigner. So this whole thing is so rough because the main thing that we've got going on here, we start off, in the present. She runs into Firo, who is trying to run from some guys. She like kind of trusts him right away, and she can't say why, but there's like a vibe to him. And she tells him that when they get to like a private area, that she is from Tanadu. And he says, "I'm Firo of Zudi. Thank you, Zen-Kara, for saving my life." She was relieved that upon confirming her Aduan origin, he didn't respond with Nomi Nomi. She hated that. So many people in Dara did that to her, either as a joke or because they thought it made them sound worldly. Over the years, she had grown used to the way the people of Dara butchered her name and even introduced herself sometimes with those twisted phonemes to make it easier for the others. Firo, however, didn't pronounce the syllables the way most in Dara did, forcing them into the patterns of Dara, but melded Aduan tones into the Dara-inflected syllables, a kind of compromise that she herself had adopted. And we find a lot out about her interest in compromise between these languages. So, out of the gate, the comparisons that I keep wanting to make here are with Americans and our attitude toward either Native American people and sometimes Indian people. Depending on the circumstance in the story, it brings something to mind in both camps. But Nomi Nomi, for me, it was making me think of Namaste and the way that white people will just like sort of throw that around. But what we get here is a biography of a girl that is really trying to figure out what her place is in a world that sees being from Tanadu as distinctive from Dara. And the people of Tanadu, similarly, when she goes home after her time in Dara, see her adoption of Dara dialects and writing as a betrayal of the traditions of Tanadu. And this is the kind of thing that I have no experience with, because I'm not, I've never been trying to reconcile being from somewhere and then going to like another country that is a major superpower and feeling like I need to be as much like them as I can to be taken seriously and fit in. That dynamic has never been a part of my life, but I know that this is a major thing for especially the children of immigrants. People who are first-generation immigrants, they're carrying over the traditions of their home and continuing to perform those traditions in the new country with an eye towards preservation of their nostalgia and memories of childhood and what is meaningful and important to them because of how they were raised. But then the first generation, often, they don't have that kind of nostalgic attachment to those traditions. They grow up surrounded by, if we're going to continue with like the example of somebody who is Indian living in the United States, if you grow up in a neighborhood with a lot of white people, doing anything other than what those white people do is going to be seen as just weird. Oh, that's weird. Your name's really hard to say. Can I just call you Jen? I don't know what that food is, but that smells really weird. No thanks. Can you like not eat that here? And I have certainly seen this. I have not experienced it, but I've seen the complicated relationship that second generation has with wanting to make their parents proud by the metric that their parents have instilled in them, but also feeling like unless they give up some of the distinctive things that make them a part of their culture, they won't be seen as truly American. They won't be seen as, part of our country because assimilating. We just really, Americans are such big fans of assimilation. We truly believe that if you come here, you should drop everything from where you're from and just begin to do everything the way we do it. Which is wild because those same people, were they to move to another country, would do no such thing. It's not actually about respecting the country you're in. It's about supremacy. And they believe their ways are inherently better. So that's what it has always been about, no matter what they say. And her character is just a really fascinating one because Zomi, she was poor, and so she came into everything with the perspective of somebody who, was from an extremely humble background and had to really struggle as a child and also had a disability, and all of these different factors were against her, but she was brilliant, and because of that was able to overcome a lot. And Zen-Kara is also brilliant, but it's all seeming to be it's never quite enough. So she does this, she writes this paper, and it is so good that all of her teachers are like, can I use this as an example to show other students? I really want to. She's being put on a pedestal here, and she really feels as if she has gotten somewhere that matters with this achievement. And it's just this rough thing. So she comes to Dara, and she's really loving it. There is so much to learn, so many different foods, different people, different things to see. And she's realizing how sort of insular her life used to be. This is where she feels she belongs. And she is going to this school. Let's see, I'm trying to find the spot where it is. Zen-Kara had obtained the highest score of the 5 who had made it to Toka Doiji. 15th highest overall in Ginpen. It was the best rank in the town examination any Master Tathu's students had ever achieved. In a less erudite part of Dara, your name would surely be at the very top of the list, declared Master Tathu with pride. A celebratory banquet was held at the Splendid Urn, Ginpen's best restaurant, and Zen-Kara, wearing her blonde hair for the first time in the double scroll buns reserved for ranked scholars, felt she had truly become a woman of Dara. Her friends toasted her, their eyes filled with equal measures of envy and admiration. Master Tathu asked for a copy of her essay so that she could use it as an example. Later that night, she summoned Zen-Kara to her study. So she's giving her all this praise. Everything is just original and beautiful. But there is almost nothing of yourself in your writing. The most powerful instrument of a writer isn't her sharpened writing knife or the heated wax spoon. It's her voice, the embodiment of her soul. Zen-Kara, you conceal yourself from your reader. You speak from behind a mask. Why are you so reluctant to embrace the authority of your own experience, the only teacher more wise than the Ano sages? Only someone who had not grown up in Dara could have offered the insight that the way we slice up time, the way we obsess over efficiency and fear its waste, is not natural. Yet you offer no examples from your life in Tan Adu, shrink from proclaiming the difference of the Aduan worldview, refuse to draw upon that treasure trove of cultural experience to strengthen your case and make your essay truly stand out. Where is your description of a days-long boar roast with the whole tribe? Where is your reminiscence of a clan-gathering trip with your sisters? Where is the smell, the taste, the sounds and colors of life in a hut in Tan Adu, surrounded by our loved ones? Had I not known you were the writer, I would not have been able to tell that it wasn't written by a woman of Dara. And this just kills her. Wasn't written by a woman of Dara. Now, I'm going to come at this from a perspective of, on the one hand, this teacher is totally clueless about the entire way to approach this in terms of, well, I'm going to cite a bunch of stereotypes at you and ask why you didn't include these specific things that in my imagination you certainly have experienced in your essay. On the other hand, the teacher pointing out that because you didn't grow up in Dara, you were able to observe our obsession with XYZ isn't normal. That is valuable. So what I think is happening is that Zen-Kara is trying to erase that aspect from her writing because she wants it to be so that if anybody were to read it, they wouldn't be able to tell that she wasn't just any other Dara woman. But there is a way to make your writing accessible and also reference why you were able to zero in on something so specifically that other folks who grew up in Dara wouldn't notice. You know, there's a balance there. And she is trying so hard to completely assimilate that when that turns out to be not possible, she is heartbroken and feels like she somehow failed. And it's simply that she is aiming for something that does kind of erase her, which isn't fair to her. But because that's genuinely her goal, and because of the way this is being phrased when she speaks to this teacher, it feels like, you know, that should be the way she approaches everything. And she is like, she goes to this performance where a man who is from Tan Adu is telling stories about the difficulty with moving to Dara and the changes in culture and everything. And she is so put off by the fact that she feels he is exploiting experiences that he had in order to almost purposefully other himself to make money, you know, and make himself a bit of a joke, but also they weirdly revere him and talk about how spiritual he is. Their primitive tribes have much wisdom that we've forgotten. And she wants to tell them those aren't her tales, that, you know, that's not what she went through. But then she's like, but the stories she tells aren't entirely lies. Some of those things do happen to people. Some of that is, and that's the thing about fucking stereotypes, is that they come from somewhere, you know, but they come from a place of sometimes, and then they get turned into always. And so there's this difficulty in pushing back against them, because the people that you're trying to explain that's not it can point to various examples that they have encountered that support the stereotype. Which is funny, because I bet they have also encountered many people that don't support that stereotype, which they immediately forget, because those people being individuals isn't something that lodges itself in their mind, you know? They are already primed to see the stereotypes because those are the stories they were told first. And then when they run into folks who fit those, then that is just confirmation bias. So anyway, I just really felt for her, because she's like, she then goes home and she's trying to explain to her father how she wants to begin to write down the oral histories of her people and preserve the stories, and that the letters that she has been taught, the Zendari letters, don't have the capacity to capture the delicacy of these stories, and that she wants to use the logograms, but that feels wrong too. And her friends start to accuse her of trying too hard to be like someone from Dara. Why do you judge our stories by their standards? If you must write the words as they're spoken. And this is an interesting thing, because, we've had the conversation between Dara and the Aegon when they were telling stories, and she's talking about writing it down. And haven't you noticed that the story changes every time it's told? And they're like, yeah, that's the point. Because Dara comes from a tradition of things being written down, and these people come from the oral tradition. And they're like, you really don't see the value in something that isn't we just straight up don't have the same interest in the parts of the story that you think are important. But here we have somebody who values both things. She comes from the oral tradition and sees the beauty of that so intently that writing it down, she can tell these are word scars and don't mean anything. They don't do the job. But she still wants to write it down. So she's on both the Aegon and Dara's side in this argument. And everybody around her is viewing her as kind of a traitor to her own culture. And she is just like, I want to protect them and preserve them. Why don't we... What's wrong with us learning to use these tools for ourselves? And she goes to her father because she's really thinking that he's going to understand where she's coming from. But he isn't on her side at all. And he says something about how she went to Dara too early in her life. That the others went after they had grown up enough that they understood who they were and were able to maintain the purity, really, of their own culture and come home again unchanged. But that she didn't know herself well enough. And that's the beauty of doing it so young. But he doesn't really understand that, because for him, the original culture, the way it is it. And she represents the change and moving forward into something new that melds both. And neither side is going to like that, because everybody sees their traditions as the fucking end goal. And if you only do kind of that, what's the point? You know, because it means something specific to them. So this whole thing, it's just really tough, because she had come to him really thinking that she's going to get a certain response. Not only does he not agree, but then he says, I'm going to forbid any Aduan students from going to Dara. And he says, you are Aduan. Kunigaru promised me no armed invasion of Tan Adu will ever take place so long as the Dandelion Throne stands, and we need not trouble ourselves with the thoughts of changing to suit the ways of Dara. Chief Kizan prohibited her from continuing to develop her hybrid literary language and script. He told her to shadow her older sister and learn to negotiate with traders from Dara, the only good use of her learning. The next day, she ran away from home and returned to the Big Island. So then we go to Firo and her encounter with him, and she is really seeing how misunderstood he feels. And there is just such a connection, even though the root of where this comes from for each of them is dramatically different. They each are in this place where they are desperately trying to explain how they feel, and they don't have the language for it exactly. And she shows him her kind of composite language that she's put together, and he loves it and is like, yeah, this is the future, this is where we're heading, and accepts it so readily. And she's just kind of taken aback by that. And there's a moment where there's a bit of prescriptivism. She's talking about irregardless is not a word. Neither is magnadazalicious. He laughed. If you say it and I understand it, how can it not be a word? Irregardless of the denunciations of moralist grammarians, isn't it magnadazalicious to have poems and stories that reflect the way the people of Dara speak rather than having to translate them into classical Ano? The classics will be fine. They've always adapted to changing readers. The logograms remain the same, but the context is constantly shifting. And I really appreciated, I used to be quite a prescriptivist with my language. And I've really grown to relax that and recognize the value in language evolving. And, there are certain things that I just, irregardless, I don't love, because we used it incorrectly for so long that now we've just decided it means that. I fucking hate that. I can't lie. I'm not trying to pretend that I have let it go completely. But there are some things that I'm just like, ugh, get over it, when people try and dig their heels in. And I really get salty about anybody who's trying to throw shade at AAVE, because it's an entire language structure. And you can see white people trying to use it, and it's so embarrassing. It's just it has rules. It's not just, you can't just do whatever. Anyway, so they have this lovely kind of conversation about being open to everything. And he says that to confront evil, one must be open to all that is good in the world. And he says it with such conviction that it really catches her off guard. And eventually she, there's this moment where she is overhearing these girls talk about her accent. And one of them says, I'm sure the graders gave her special consideration because she's, one of those. This is a real thing that a lot of my friends who are not white have experienced, is folks who have said to them that they believe they got XYZ for free because they're black or Hispanic or disabled or whatever, which is just so wild, because it just doesn't work like that. Maybe occasionally you can come across maybe a nice scholarship or something. That's something you have to fight others for. And it's not a given that you just get in because, but people really think that. It's the same thing as people who are just like, well, you can come here as an illegal citizen and get, start collecting unemployment. And it's just like, that's not how any of that works. She gets letters from her father, from Ginpen, to Ginpen, asking her to come home and telling her they miss her. And I'm like, should have thought of that. And she winds up sleeping with Firo and talks to him about her family and explains everything. And then he shares back with her everything that he has been through. And they just really both kind of feel like exiles. And eventually, Firo is talking about his plan, and she says, there are no merchant ships large enough to do what you want. There's only one course, a route pointed to by wayposts from history and legend. My father's voice is loud and sonorous, but it is hardly the only voice in Tan Adu. They may listen to me where they did not listen to him. And he's like, that would be amazing, but I don't have anything to offer you to, like, you know, make up for this. And she says, no, that's not what this is about. I just think that we need to take risks. The creation of a great literature requires not only words and scripts, but also deeds worthy of being recorded. They looked into each other's eyes, two hearts ready for a duet with no misunderstanding. And that's the end of the chapter. But I really liked that one. And I really like her as a character and, you know, the conflict that she's dealing with. There's no right answers, you know, to something like this when you're trying to meld things and compromise and learn two things that feel oftentimes like they are in direct opposition to each other. You just have to go with what feels right. And the people around you who don't have that sort of connection to both are never going to understand it. But you can't help feeling like you need their approval about it. And you'll never get it. That's kind of the way it has to work. And you have to do it anyway. And that's a really scary thing. That's like a tall order. So yeah, I really, really liked this section. I'm sorry I had to kind of rush through a lot because it was so long, but you know, I wanted to really focus on her like internal struggles. So, all right, I'm going to wrap this up, but thank you again, Kyle, for commissioning this. Appreciate you a lot. Thank you to Miss T for hanging out in the chat. I appreciate everyone listening. Hope you're enjoying the coverage. And until next time, toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.